Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's Friday, April 24th. I'm so glad you're here. Really appreciate you being part of this community. And thank you to those of you who are able to watch the live stream today, as well as those of you who are coming in on the replay. And as always, it's our goal to just be a platform of storytellers. I've got stories to tell, you've got stories to tell. And as we like to say, your story becomes someone else's survival manual. And so we have a special guest I'm going to bring in just a minute. And before I do, I wanted to mention if anyone would like to be part of our deconversion poetry slam, we're having that tomorrow night, Saturday night at 6 p.m. Eastern. Hey, Mark, great to see you. Thanks for being here. We'd love to have you. If you are interested in sharing poetry or a song or something like that about your journey, even if it's just free verse, stream of consciousness that you wrote down, we'd love to have you. Poetry is a part of our healing process, so please let me know if you're interested. And if you want to reach out to me, my handle on Facebook is Harmonic Tim. My email address is HarmonicAtheist@yahoo.com. And if anyone is interested in doing an interview, then please reach out the same way. Also, I am doing one-on-one peer support, non-clinical, but if anyone would like some help with just talking through the journey of deconversion, of shunning, healing from religious trauma from a peer support network kind of concept, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to be part of your support process there, because there's so many people that are going through this alone. Please don't feel like you need to go through this alone. And also, in terms of the channel, I definitely want to urge you to support the channel if you can. I'm trying my hardest, my best to stay on and do this full time. Please do support me in any of the ways linked beneath this video. With that being said, I'm going to bring in our guest. And today we're speaking with Nikki G. Nikki, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invite, Tim. I'm so glad to be here and shouting out the community here at Harmonic Atheist. I appreciate you all for being here too.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's an honor to have you here. And I'm going to give a quick bio for Nikki, and then we'll get started with her story. Nikki is originally from Newark, New Jersey, and then she has been all over the place. She's been to Kansas City, Missouri, Richmond, Virginia. Now she lives in Dallas. But she is a life coach and an advanced certified trauma recovery coach. She helps survivors to recover and to thrive after narcissistic abuse, as well as religious trauma and spiritual abuse and cult involvement and involvement with high demand groups. She is also a survivor herself of multiple narcissistic relationships and of cultic communities. She is the CEO of Nikki G Speaks, which exists to support survivors with individual coaching services, webinars, group coaching, and other forms of psychoeducation related to religious trauma and cult involvement. She educates and empowers survivors to reclaim their lives and to embrace the journey to come back home to themselves. She's also the co-host of the podcast Surviving the Black Church. By the way, I'll have the links for all this stuff beneath this video, so please do check it out. Subscribe to her YouTube channel. She is one of the co-hosts there, where they dive into conversations regarding religious trauma, often specifically in the Black church. She's also the co-founder of the Black Religious Trauma Recovery Network, which educates and supports Black religious trauma survivors. Nikki sits on the board of directors for a nonprofit called Tears of Eden, which supports survivors who have experienced abuse in the evangelical community. She's been a guest on many, many podcasts and channels, so you can probably just go to YouTube and search for her. You'll come up with a whole bunch of stuff there. I've been on several of your interviews. I love seeing them. You did a great job. And also, she is involved in many different aspects of just religious trauma and cult involvement in terms of trying to be in the conversation. And that's what we're here to do today, is to get this conversation continued, where people are just looking for resources to be able to figure out what happened and how to start over. So we're glad you're here. Before we get into your story, could you please just tell us some fun things about yourself and anything else about your bio that I missed?
Okay, well, this year, like I just mentioned to you, Tim, this September will mark 10 years that I've been cult-free, so I'm excited about that. And I've enjoyed the recovery journey for myself and really learning about who I am and just things that I like. So I love sci-fi movies and shows. I love Dune and Foundation and Star Wars, Game of Thrones. Like I nerd out with a lot of that. I love documentaries. I love all forms of music, but specifically I love listening to scores. And Hans Zimmer and Ludwig and John Williams are that's my trifecta. I love just going in the car and just driving, putting on some Hans Zimmer or Ludwig and just allowing myself to be. So those are fun things for me. There are more, but I'll stop right there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What's your favorite sci-fi show?
I don't know, but right now, Foundation, that's been on Apple TV. They've had 3 seasons. If you haven't checked it out, please do. It's phenomenal. Honestly, before there was Star Wars, before there was Star Trek, there was Foundation by Isaac Asimov, and he has a whole series of books, and they're making the adaptation of it. And I just love what Apple TV is doing with it. So Foundation is probably number one for me right now.
Nice, nice. I will look that up. Thank you for letting us know. That's awesome.
Hmm.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. Basically, it feels like we're kind of attacking this one from two angles. Number one, of course, we just want to hear your story. But number two, you've also got a lot of wisdom and insight from the work that you do and working with so many cult survivors and just reflecting on your experience. Before we get into your current work, though, could you just take us back? What was it like growing up? And what did you hear about Jesus and the Bible and salvation?
Hmm. That's a loaded question, Tim, but I'll try. So I grew up in what I describe as a religious narcissistic family system. And so the double whammy right there with narcissism and then the religious indoctrination within my family system was paramount. And so what did that look like? I mean, obviously I wasn't aware of this when I was growing up. I just knew something just didn't feel right, something didn't seem right. I consider myself somewhat of an intuitive person, not on the woo-woo side, but just, I pick things up. And I think early on as a child, and being very empathic, I was able to pick up a lot of dysfunction in my family system. A lot of things seemed good on paper and seemed very benevolent and altruistic as far as my family's endeavors in the community. But behind closed doors, there was a lot of dysfunction, a lot of emotional dysregulation, and narcissistic tendencies. And so, as far as like religious beliefs, a lot of what was actually modeled in my family system, I would say the number one was the forgiveness piece, the forgiveness aspect of you forgive anybody, everybody, if you
Mm.
want to be closer to God. And I noticed my family doing that. I noticed my parents doing that, but um, I saw the disconnect between all of that. I saw that, wait a minute, we're forgiving people that have been taking advantage of us. We're forgiving people that have been abusive. We're forgiving people that probably don't need forgiveness, but they would just kind of just spiritually bypass it and just say, no, the Bible says forgive. God says forgive. We want him to forgive us. And so this is what we do. And so, I never thought about it this way early on, but forgiveness was kind of the first blinder that was put on me, if you will, in my
Mm.
family system that would later on cause me to not see the predators coming my way, not seeing the narcissists coming my way. I would just, bypass it and just say, oh, that's just me. I'm probably wrong. This is not an abusive person. This is not a religious abusive leader. It's just me. They're more spiritual than me. And so that forgiveness piece was very paramount. And it, like I said, it was the blindfold that caused me to kind of be programmed and attracted to these type of predatory people and environments. I think the other one, the biggest one to me, was dealing with authority figures. And so, because I picked things up, I would say things, especially, young, and then an adolescent, you're like, hey, this doesn't feel right. This is wrong. This is dysfunctional. And, I would be dismissed and not taken seriously. And so what I learned, how I internalized it was, okay, the authority figures are right. And what I'm thinking, what I'm perceiving, what I'm seeing is wrong. And they are the ones that define reality. I myself didn't understand that that's what was going on, but surely over time, I started to dismiss my own perceptions. I started to dismiss what I saw and what I could perceive, and I started to submit to what authority figures said was reality. So I could see the sky was blue, but if they said the sky was brown, I would contest in the beginning, but over time I would just eventually submit. This also was an on ramp for me when I would eventually find myself in 5 different cults with different cult leaders.
Mm.
And their version of reality. Again, my parents probably didn't know what they were doing. In their mind, religion was the parent of my parents. So this was the epicenter of my family. This is what the model was. This is what the focus was. And so these subsequent lessons that I picked up, the subsequent indoctrination, it just primed me to just, my life. I'm 49 years old, but I've had my fair share of so many narcissistic people, from job to friends to, eventually 5 different cults, because I was totally unaware of what was going on. And I definitely didn't see the connection between the developmental trauma that I experienced and then the religious trauma. I didn't see any of this. I just knew, this is how I'm supposed to be. It doesn't matter how people are. And then the other area I would highlight is appearance over authenticity was very big in my family system. So how it looked to others mattered, what the image was. And I used to see people on the outside like, oh, your family's such an awesome family, you're so blessed and everything like that. Now, there was not physical abuse, but there was emotional abuse. There was gaslighting. There was a manipulation of my reality. But a lot of it, again, I had no voice, I had no agency. And so for me to survive, I just learned to shrink. And I carried that into these different places that I would go and these different cults that I was a part of. And, that was the key part for me for recovery. I'm not trying to jump ahead, but it was one thing to unpack the cult leader. It was another thing to unpack the system I was in. It was another thing to unpack the people that I connected with and the community I had. It's another thing when you're able to start connecting the dots and see how parallel a lot of these cults and these systems that we become a part of mirror our family systems growing up.
Can I ask, just for your storyline, was there a time in your childhood when you were like invited by pastor or your parents or something to place your faith in Christ as your savior? And like, when was there like an actual firm mental commitment to Jesus that occurred?
Well, Tim, I have a story about that too. So I did not get saved the conventional way. Y'all ready for this one? So I got saved reading conspiracy theory books. My first year in college, away from home, and Delaware State is where I went. And I started reading everything about Illuminati and secret societies and William Cooper's book, Behold the Pale Horse. And I went down that rabbit trail, and I just ingested so much material around that time. And as I was reading a lot of these things, a lot of the material would refer back to a lot of apocalyptic passages in the Bible, Revelations, Daniel, Ezekiel. And so I grew up in church. I grew up in a Baptist church, from a young age, but it did not become personal and real for me until I started having these experiences. And so after reading all this stuff, I came to the conclusion, I said, okay, wait a minute. So Jesus and the rapture, you're the way out of this. There's nothing we can do about this whole system of control. So, all right, I guess I'll get saved. So in my basement, I said, I've seen this enough times in church. I know how to do this. And I made it a reality for me. And so, I turned the page and I got serious. I went from, playing around in college and drinking and hanging out and doing all the things to really get serious. And my parents were very shocked. Like, what happened to you? And I started to consume all these scriptures and passages in the Bible, and it became real for me. And so at age 19, that's when I say, I got saved. But again, I got saved through fear. It wasn't because, oh, God loves me and I see how he treats me, my people, my family, my friends. No, it's going to be crazy. The rapture is going to happen. And I want to be in that number. So let me just get saved. So that's how I got saved at 19. And I've always been the type of person, I'm a very curious person. I love to read. I love to learn just for the hell of it. But as I started to consume this information, I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this full throttle. And so I got serious, and, I went back to my home church. I talked so much that they said, maybe you should lead the youth ministry. So within 4 months, I'm leading the youth ministry. The numbers doubled. I'm just talking. And I realized, okay, this Baptist church isn't sufficient for me. I need intensity. I need something more than this. And that is when I found myself eventually in my first cult. So I'll pause right there in case you want to say anything.
Well, it's amazing. Real quick, as an aside, it sounds like something's hitting your microphone. Is there anything is wiggling there?
Hold on. Let me see.
Sure. It almost sounds like a little bit of rain, like light drops on the
It
rain.
might be here, so I'll try not to move as much. Can you hear me better now?
I can, but I can still hear it sounds like little light raindrops. No, if there's nothing, that's fine. But it's amazing that you got in through the route of now whatever you were. Yeah, I can hear it, but also that was whatever you just did there. That was really loud. Is there anything you need to adjust? So I put you on mute for a second while you were adjusting it. Yeah, it sounds like. So I'm going to give her a second to work on that. It sounded like a little bit of a windstorm on my side. I don't know if anyone else heard that the way I did, but I hope I'm not making that up.
Is that better?
Okay, I think so. Yeah. It sounded like a bit of a rainstorm there. It sounded like you had a little mini tornado going through your office. So that's better. With the conspiracy theory, were you specifically focused? I know you mentioned the end times, but like, were you focused on all kinds of aspects of it in terms of like, the Antichrist kind of stuff? Like, what were the details of the conspiracy theory that made you, drive yourself to the cross?
It's been so long to think about it. I just think everything I was consuming just seemed like it was impossible to go through that time period and exist without having a relationship with Christ. The way it was presented, this was the only way to be, saved from the mayhem that was going to ensue. And I don't recall a lot of it. I'm still at 2026. I still keep myself informed. I still see things that are happening in the world, but I just don't get consumed with it like I did then. But back then, I think the Antichrist, I read a lot of those Left Behind books that were out during that time. New World Order, secret societies, governmental plots, 13 Illuminati bloodlines, stuff like that. I just really, I lived in the library at that time because there wasn't that much internet access during that time. And I just stayed there and just consumed it all. So that was kind of the fervor that helped me to take this serious and, have an appetite for its either intensity or bust. If I don't want just lackluster or God loves me in church for 5 minutes and then leave. I wanted to feel it. I wanted the passion. I wanted all of those type of things. So yeah.
It's interesting. The one thing I didn't go down that route myself necessarily, but the one part of it that I would say was close to it was just being overwhelmed with the idea of the angels and demons fighting around us. Did you get into that at all?
I got into that, but that's in one of the cults that I got into, and maybe that'll come up in our discussion. Yeah.
Sounds good. I did want to go back for 1 second, and then you can keep going with your story. But you mentioned, that you observed, a lot of narcissism over all these different relationships in your family as well as religiously. When you were in it, did you sense it was toxic and unhealthy, or is that just something you were able to see years later, or did you struggle with it at the time and say something's wrong as I'm experiencing it growing up?
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought that back up because that is something that I wanted to highlight. Remember how I mentioned how that forgiveness piece, that forgiveness belief kind of blinded me? So I would meet people and my intuition would kind of tell me initially something wasn't right, but I would bypass it. And then sometimes I would really start getting receipts and realizing, wait a minute, what I was, perceiving was actually authentic. But by that point, I was already engulfed in the relationship, in the friendship. I was already deep in the church and deep in the, participating in different things within the cult. And so I didn't know how to get out because I felt like, well, I'm already in it. And how do I deal with this? How do I extract myself from it? And then there was the other piece that because I was so used to, basically giving over my ability to perceive and see reality over to authority leaders, I just was like, well, they're more spiritual than me. They have encounters that I've never had. They know things about the Bible and about Jesus I've never experienced. So it has to be me. Something has to be wrong. So even though I'm seeing all these red flags, let me shrink and let me, enlarge them because that's what I was used to doing in my family system.
It's amazing. I've mentioned this before, so I'll keep this short. But thing that reminds me of with my life is I got under some preaching as well as some music from some Christian musicians who basically talked about the idea that so many of us are looking and acting like our Christian life is requiring all these answers from God. Like, God, if you'll just, show me your will, or you'll show me the answer to this supposed discrepancy in the Bible, or whatever it is, how I should, what ministry I should be involved in, whatever it is. That there's all these questions that we come up with, and we kind of feel like we're wrestling with God, and as if that's a good thing. And some of the theologians and musicians, Christian musicians that I was really heavily influenced by, would talk about the idea that what God wants you to do with your heart and your mind is not to come at him with all these questions and say, God, please answer my questions, and then I'll be okay, then I'll worship you, but to
Hmm.
worship him fully without the answers, and to say, all I need is not answers, I need you. I need to bow at
Hmm.
the foot of the cross. And yes, there's the sense of, like, as I grow in my maturity, and especially as I get to heaven, I will eventually have these answers that I long for so much, but I shouldn't need them. I should know that he has the answers, but that what he is the ultimate answer. And as long as I've got him,
Hmm.
everything
Hmm.
else will resolve itself. And it's amazing when you have that, and some other few other aspects of theology. For me, it was Calvinism, but some aspects of theology that kind of keep you really suppressed in this, where you just think,
Hmm.
I need to stop worrying and being so concerned. I need to simply trust him. And I think that's related to the narcissism, where you realize later on that you're dealing not just with narcissistic culture and people and systems, you're dealing with an narcissistic God character. He's
Yeah.
psychopathic, and you realize how it's trickled down, but you realize that you've given yourself over, you've given your power over to basically a psychopathic, abusive character on the
Hmm.
grandest
Hmm.
scale. And you've said, I'm just so happy to love you. And I did want to ask, maybe that's a good question to go to next. How did the whole idea of the love versus abuse kind of merge for you, where you can't see one versus the other, the abuse and love kind of become one and the same?
Hmm. Well, before I say that, I'm thinking about listening to what you just shared, that scripture that we heard to enforce that narrative, that lean not to your own understanding, in all thy ways acknowledge him and he'll direct you. So basically, turn off your mind, turn off your intuition, just follow blindly, just listen, just obey, and you'll be fine. He'll acknowledge you. So that's a horrible way to think and to live. But as far as that love and abuse piece, that was also a big factor in my family of origin, especially in the different cults I was in. No one specifically taught love and abuse go together, that they're married, but that's what's modeled, that's what's implied. And even now, 10 years out, been doing this work. I still continue to go to therapy for my own self. You can't be in five cults and think, okay, I read a few books, I'm good now. It doesn't work that way. It's still a lot of layers to unpack. And recently and personally, I've been working through love schemas, systems of thoughts that were built, in my early years, and even in the cult experiences, that have these lies that love and abuse are supposed to go together. And so you tolerate more, you endure more, you turn a blind eye to a lot of things that, abuse is so normalized in a lot of these systems that we're referring to, that it's hard to identify it. It's hard to see it and to actually say, okay, let me pull myself out of it. I don't want to be in an abusive situation. But by the time we are aware of it, sometimes we don't have the strength or the knowledge or the support on how to extract ourselves from it. But that is something that, especially in the Black community, in the Black church, that is modeled and enforced, to just suffer for righteousness' sake, and then he'll bless you and things of that nature. I'm not trying to get ahead of myself, but that's one of the big sticklers that I've heard a lot. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I saw that so many times and grown up too. It's amazing how much we are, like, once you have few steps in place. Number one, the Bible's the word of God. You don't question it. Number two, God is good. You don't question it, even if he seems harsh. And a few other things. The pastor is virtually unassailable. He can do no wrong. You get a few of those things in place, and man, they can just do whirlwinds of damage to you over the
Absolutely.
years. When
Absolutely.
when you were looking at your parents' relationship, did you feel like they were close to God? Did you admire their relationship with Christ?
Yeah, I mean, when I was young, I did, but as I got older, um, and then, even when I got saved myself, I took it further than what they did. They kind of stayed in the realm of, in the beginning, when I was younger, the Baptist style of church, and then eventually a non-denominational church, and they became leaders there and things of that nature. But I went even further. I mean, even further in my appetite for what I wanted to understand about Christianity, how I wanted to practice my faith. A lot of what they were in became insufficient to me. And I just was like, I need it intense or it's not going to work for me. Yeah.
Hmm. Just a quick question before I wanted to have you go on to the next part of your story, but what was the whole context for you at this point before you sort of officially dove into the deepest end of the cult involvement? What was your expectation in terms of gender roles for your life as a Christian?
Honestly, at that time, I never really thought about it. I mean, I knew that, as a woman, there's certain things that are expected, in the household, and then obviously within the church setting. But like my first cult leader, uh, she was a woman. So that was a little different. Most of the subsequent cult leaders were men, except one. So there was another woman. But, that just kind of said, okay, well, I guess men and women can do these type of things. It wasn't until I started getting deep in the cults and purity culture started to ensue that, things really started to take a hold. But, in the household, in the family system, it wasn't like that enforced. Like my dad did nothing and my mom did everything. And, she just would slave at everything, cooking, cleaning, whatever. It wasn't like that for my family system. But once I got deep into these cults and started to really be in these intense environments, that's when gender roles really started to emerge a little bit more, especially connected with purity culture.
Yeah. In terms of just your understanding of Black churches in general, maybe in contrast to my experiences in the white churches obviously deal a lot with systemic racism, but they also
Hmm.
deal a lot with patriarchy, where they
Hmm.
want the men to always be in charge. I'm sure there's some exceptions, of course, but my experience was just men across the board. Women can maybe occasionally be a deaconess, but with strict limits. They
Hmm.
didn't want the women actually teaching over the men, and just
Hmm.
misogyny on steroids kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Is it accurate to say that there's a little bit more of a balance in the Black churches where it's like there's more women that are involved at a higher level?
Yeah, I would say that. I would say that. There was still patriarchy though. And some women actually still carry out a lot of the mindset and the ideology behind patriarchy, but it's very common to find women pastors and women apostles and women prophets within the Black community. A lot of these, women leaders, religious leaders, had a big impact in my life, for the for the bad than the good. But yeah, it's more common within the Black church to see that.
Hmm. What happened? What was your first cult? If feel free to mention
Yeah,
names
yeah,
if you feel like you can. If you can't, that's fine. But what
yeah.
was the first cult like?
So the first cult, this is when I was still living in New Jersey. It's called Honey's Child Ministries. It was named after the leader's mother. Her name was Honey, and so she was her child, and she was furthering the work, so to speak. But the first cult leader is my soon-to-be 25-year-old daughter's grandmother. So you can imagine the intersectionality behind all of the things of dealing with that. Again, remember, I got saved on end times, in eschatology and cutting my teeth with all that stuff. So that appealed to me. And this ministry, it was a smaller ministry. I would consider it a storefront type ministry. And in the Black community, that's very common. And those storefront, for those who don't know, it's those ministries, I would say, I call them like rubber band ministries. They may expand to 100 and come back down to 50. Many of them are family style church, family led churches. So the pastor, and maybe, like in this instance, she was the leader, she was the prophet, so she gave the teachings and the word, as they put it in the Black community. Her husband was the worship minister of music, so he was the one that led the music. Her kids sung on the worship team. Some of them were on leadership and everything like that. So it was infused with the family. So when you have those type of environments, it's really hard. If you go against one, you go against all. And they all are enforcers of whatever the main leader is saying and teaching and wants done. So, they may not see it, the leader may not see it, but the family may see it. And they will come and, have a private conversation with you and rebuke you just as easy as the leader would. And so I found out about this ministry because I'm 19, maybe 20 at this time, and I'm reading all this stuff. I'm going to my parents' church that I grew up in. It's not enough. Even though I'm leading, the youth group, I wanted more. And through a friend, I went to a play and found this young group of people who were on fire for God. And I was like, who are they? Like, I want to know more. And so one day I visited their church, and the pastor, she called herself an apostle, but at the time she wasn't calling herself that. But I'll just say pastor for the podcast sake. She saw me, she singled me out, she prophesied over me. And for those who are not familiar with that exercise, is she started to quote unquote give me information that she thought God was saying about my life. And a lot of people can often get what I say trauma bonded to prophetic words, hearing them over and over again. There's being enamored, and there's an allure about hearing someone say something to me that, no one else knew. And so she did that, and she talked about how God wanted to use my life. She started talking about some of my giftings that I didn't think she knew about. And that just kind of set me on a precedent to really start coming to this church and being a part of it. And, I think I was there for about 4 years or so, give or take. But, she encouraged her son and I to be on projects and everything like that. She liked me for him. I thought he was cool. He became a good friend, but I didn't look at him like that. But over time I did. And, we eventually had a child, but I was planning on, getting an abortion. And the day before I had it planned, maybe I'll hold back some of this story because people will probably think I'm crazy, but like interesting things have happened throughout the course of my life. Let's just say how I found out that I was pregnant was not, first taking a pregnancy test. It was going to the bathroom of a grocery store. No, not taking a pregnancy test. That was when I found out officially, but I was home. I opened the door, checked the mail, and baby magazines and Similac started coming to my house. I mean, I didn't sign up for anything. No one in the house signed up for that. It's just things started coming in. And, I opened up the Bible as soon as I opened it up, it landed right on the passage with David and Bathsheba, and that, he sinned and there are consequences you have to pay for. And at that moment, I knew I was pregnant. And so I wanted to verify it. And then I went to a grocery store and took a test, and I knew I was pregnant. But for months, I just knew I can't do this. I have to, I started having dreams. And one of the dreams was I saw that if I went through it, that I was not going to make it out of the procedure, nor would my child at the time. And so that kind of coerced me to some degree to have my now daughter. And so once the leader found out I was pregnant, especially by her son, that is when, beforehand, our relationship, she was a spiritual mom to me. I hung around with her all the time. She was mentoring me. Everything was good. Once she found out I was pregnant, this is when I started to see the narcissistic rage. I started to see some of the things she would do. And so she would start preaching about me in the pulpit. She wouldn't say my name, but she would talk about my situation. And to the point people were kind of looking around. And so I hid my pregnancy from everybody in the church as long as I could till about my last trimester, because I did carry small. But there was so much shame. And, guest ministers would come and preach that we were familiar with, and they would prophesy over me, and they would say things, and she would give them this look and give me this look like, you better not react, but they were wanting to love me in my choice to have my daughter. Whereas she wanted to shame me and ridicule me and everything like that. And so, eventually had my daughter, and let's just say there's some things that she did to try to prevent her from coming to the planet. I'll just leave it like that. Maybe Tim, I'll tell you off camera, but it was just a very interesting ordeal. And so she and her husband did not embrace my daughter. They did not come to the hospital or anything like that. And I just went through, being a new parent and trying to navigate all of these things. And she basically encouraged her son to leave me alone, and it wasn't God's will for us to be together. And it just, how I left the church, to round up the story, is she physically assaulted me with my daughter in my arms, and that was the last straw. Up until that point, what was I thinking? I'm a part of God's army. This is the devil at work. This is not her. This is the devil at work. He's trying to take me out of the will of God. I will continue to suffer for righteousness' sake. I don't care what she says, what's going on. I'm going to keep coming. I'm going to keep going. And that was primed in me in my family of origin. It was primed in me in this particular cult, but it was also primed in me as being a Black person, a Black American, a Black woman, and we can get into that later. And so it took something so drastic as her physically assaulting me with my daughter in my hand at her house one day for me to say, okay, I don't think I should come back to the church anymore. And I grieved and cried the relationship I had with her and missing the church more than the abusive behavior that she was exhibiting towards me and my daughter at the time. And so it's so unfortunate, a lot of my daughter's side of the family, she doesn't connect with. It's just toxicity all around. And so, I sat with myself and say, even my mom was like, you can't go back. I'm like, yeah, I know. And I hated that because I still wanted to go back after all of that. But then I just took that time and started to read, and I spiritualized what happened. I think I came to the conclusion that it was cultish. I came to the conclusion there was religious spirits at work. I came to the conclusion some Jezebel spirits was at work. And that's for women who've been in and that are listening, that's been in ministry, Jezebel is something that we been labeled with, but I put that on her. And I came to the conclusion, this was wrong. This was abusive. That doesn't mean I need to leave my relationship with God. I'm going to move forward. So I spiritualized it. I still didn't understand what was going on fully, but I just was like, oh, I'm going to still march on with God. And then eventually I went to my subsequent 4 other cults and still had that same mentality. I'm going to stop right there.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Real quick, before I make a comment, something keeps hitting your microphone really hard, like a whack. Is there anything you can do to adjust that?
I'm going to try to stay still because I think it's my hair and I'm moving. I talk when I move, so I'll try to.
Oh, is your microphone on your earbud?
Uh-huh.
Is it? Okay, gotcha. I was thinking it was right in front of you or something. I've got like one of those.
Oh, no. I got the earpiece.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about
something
that.
Sounds like it. No, it's fine. Something's like hitting it, but it's amazing to me that, like, it sounds, you were mentioning before that, like, it's so much about appearance. It sounds like that cult leader really had a cult of her personality and the appearance of, like, I have to look so good. And maybe, your story ended up making her feel like she didn't have this perfect image in some way, but to take that out, especially on a precious child, like, oh my goodness, like what kind of, horrific worldview do you have to have where you would not care about someone, especially a young mother who would need obviously support and love, care, and it, this is her own, in a sense, progeny. Like, do you not care about this precious child? And that just blows me away. It really blows me away. And I know people say this a lot these days, but it's amazing to me how Christianity pretends to be so pro-life, and yet in so many ways is really, when you get down to it, they're not. They're really not. They don't live pro-life at all. They're very pro-death in their practical outlook. But when you were going through that, it sounds like you were saying towards the end that you were able to really sort of disassociate her behavior from God. So you were still as upset or disappointed and devastated from that. You and God were still fine because God was not in any way overlapping with her abusiveness in your mind, right?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I wasn't angry with God. I felt more ashamed, like I failed him, that I displeased him. Even the fact that I thought about having an abortion, and then I had a baby out of wedlock, and so there was a lot of shame that I carried. when I was pregnant and even after I had my child. And, that put such a monkey wrench in my relationship with God that I felt that I would always be trying to play catch up from those events.
Yeah.
Even though I would stay in the faith, I would always be playing catch up because did he really forgive me? Am I really pleasing him now? And so that was always the undercurrents of, my belief system still, and holding on to my faith. I just still didn't 100% feel like I was connected to God. But I
Like the
try.
Scarlet Letter.
Mhm.
Yeah, the Scarlet Letter at that point. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
amazing how that works. I saw that so many times too growing up. I don't think I got necessarily close to that edge too much, but I got
Mhm.
close in some ways. I would say, at least in my own heart. But I saw it in other people. I remember even at a very young age seeing a girl at this church when I was a kid. I was a little kid, did not understand what all happened, but she got up in front of the whole church and apologized for having gotten pregnant as like a 15-year-old. Apologized to the whole church, and I just thought she's gonna carry that. Like I'm that girl. I'm the girl that got pregnant at 15 because she had to
Yeah.
apologize to the whole church. And that little kid growing up eventually is going to be known as like the kid out of wedlock as opposed to just a beautiful
Mhm.
child. And it's very sad. It's very sad. It's
It
amazing
is.
too that expression
That
we shoot
happened.
our wounded.
That happened to one of my friends in that ministry as well, and she couldn't have a baby shower because it would seem as if it was a form of celebrating having a child out of wedlock. And the same thing happened with me. I couldn't have a baby shower and things of that nature. And so, there was a lot more malicious and evil things that she said to me when I was pregnant. When after I had the child one on one, that just started to move into me being afraid of her. And so I tried to separate as much as I could after I had my child from that. I mean, her and her husband didn't offer anything to help or anything. So it was, I got to the point when I realized, okay, this is going to be my child. I'm going to raise her, and if this is how it is, let me just deal with it and move forward. So yeah.
Amazing. Mm.
Mhm. Mhm.
At this point, though, it sounds like you were saying you really weren't sort of connecting some of the dots in terms of the way cults work yet. So you at this
Mm-mm.
point, you were almost, it sounds like maybe at the opposite level where you weren't, your spidey senses were not for I got to stay away from cults, but I need to get plugged into a church again desperately. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, because especially in the Black community, and this particular cult was, majority Black. And there's this notion that's kind of taught like, you don't stay out of the will of God. You find yourself in church no matter what happens. Don't put on God what leaders are doing. There's a difference between the leaders and God, but oftentimes these leaders superimpose themselves over God to speak for God, to say they have delegated authority and divine authority to speak and to lead and guide, through God. But now I'm supposed to say that's not the case, but it is encouraged and to some degree almost demanded that if you are in church and you have an issue with a particular church that you're in and you need to leave, you do not stay out of what they call the auspices of the covering of God. You need to be in church no matter what. And so that kind of being seared and branded on my psychological thinking, I just kept cold topping because in my mind, the time and the distance that I was away from the house of God, I could be open prey for the enemy to do things. I'm not under the covering. So to be in church is to be up under covering. So a lot of that, it did scare me. And so just like people that are in toxic relationships or abusive relationships, if you don't process what has happened, different things about them, about yourself, you'll continue to go through the same thing with just different people. And that's kind of how I cult hop until the last cult. And I said, wait a minute, I have to figure this out. I'm the common denominator here. I mean, obviously, this is not something that I asked for, but I got to stop this cycle. And so, I
Yeah.
started to stop the cycle once I stopped spiritualizing my experience. When I stopped looking for what happened in the scriptures and in prayer and in fasting. And I started to actually get some psychoeducation and reading books and watching YouTubes and really learning about cult dynamics, about narcissism, about, coercive control. And that education started to help me to really start to say, whoa, what have I been in? This is very interesting. And so, yeah, kind of
Mm.
jumped ahead, but
It's amazing too, like when you're saying about you feel like you need to be in church. It's the preachment, you be in the will of God, but it's like that shaming, like you better do it. But there's
yeah,
also the positive pull, if I can put it this way, of like you feel like everything that you need is there. Everything you need to be healthy, everything you need to thrive. Obviously, you need to be in a good church, a Bible preaching
yeah,
church, under good leadership. But the idea, like, if you could get into the right community where they love you the right way with the love of God and they preach the word of God, in the right way. In my experience, it was expository preaching. But when they
hmm
honor the word
hmm
of God
hmm
and they're faithful to it, that it's not just that you better do it, you should do it. We're going to kind of command you to do it. It's that you need to. Do you want to be healthy or not? Do you want to live a fulfilled life or not? Do you want to thrive or not? And I think that really sinks into so many of us. Everything you need for life and godliness is
godliness.
in the
Uh-huh.
church. And man, oh man, it's just they get you. Well, what was the second cult that you went to?
Well, what's interesting is I left that first cult and I went to a couple of what I consider safer or healthier churches. I wouldn't consider them cults, but I wasn't content there. I needed, because the first cult was very demonstrative and expressive and worship and prayer and intercession. There was a lot of spiritual warfare. There was a lot of gifts of the spirit. And so I cut my teeth on that, so to speak. And so when I went to churches that didn't do that, they just kind of preached love God, love your neighbor, love yourself, do good, be benevolent in your communities. Like, I was like, this is boring. My system wanted that intensity, wanted that rush. A pastor friend of the mine, a family, and I say friend of mine because he was the first person that really, after all these cult experience, he talked to me and he was so down to earth and human about my experience. He said, "Okay, you were probably dealing with a religious addiction. And so you cut your teeth on this type of drug, this form of high intensity type of relationship with God, with the Bible, with how you expressed your faith, and nothing else satisfied after that. So you were still continuing to look for that high." He said, "So I can understand if you can't read the Bible right now. I can understand if you can't go to church, you don't want to worship." He said, "I'm going to go against what my peers would say. Don't do it." He said, "Be human, take a break and just feel yourself and learn yourself. And if you decide you want to come back around and connect with God and, Christianity or whatever, that's on you, but at least it'll be something that you authentically chose." And I never forgot that. Most pastors wouldn't have told me that, but he was real about it. And so, those safer, healthier churches I went to, but it wasn't enough. So this is when I found out about the International House of Prayer in Kansas City, and I started watching them online and streaming their 24/7 since 1999 prayer room, and I was
Wow.
enamored. What were some of the things that caused me to be like, whoa? A lot of young adults on fire for God. They talked about the end times. They talked about real serious love for God and love for Jesus and how, we surrender and we give ourselves over to him. And the teaching was very end time and loving God at the same time. And it just drew me in. And so I'm like, I got to go visit this place, and I think
And you moved
2009.
you moved there specifically for them?
Oh, yes, I did. Yes, I
Wow.
did. I've always been a risk taker. I've learned to temper that now. But back then, I was so consumed with this is what I want, this is what I need, this is the safety key for when things, start to get crazy on the planet. If I'm not going to do this full and intense, I don't want it at all. And then I thought this would be a great place to raise my daughter in the ways of God. And so 2009, I went down there and visited the base, the community with a friend of mine. They had a conference called One Thing, and it's at the end of every year into the new year. It was like over 50,000 young people. There was adults there too, but a lot of young adults. And I just was like, I need, this is what I'm looking for. And so I worked things out. And by 2010 of that next year, that summer, I was moved out there with my daughter. And I just was like, I'm home. I said the same thing about the first cult. I'm home. Said the same thing about my the cult leader. I have a spiritual mom. I have a covering. I have somebody to lead and guide me, because my parents weren't doing that. Yes, they provided for me and things of that nature, but they were worshiping religion. And so there was a deficit, there was a neglect. And so some of the unmet needs that I had in my family system, I carried those in my search for different cults that I was a part of. And I'll stop right there and see what you had anything to throw in.
It's amazing how that works. I love though how, just to highlight one thing you said about the intensity part of it. I saw some comments. We'll go to the comments in a minute.
Yeah.
Some of them talk about it, but I think that's what really stands out to me is you're hitting on something that I haven't probably thought about too directly, but I love it. I love when people bring up stuff from like, yeah, I relate to that. You just put words in my mouth, but I didn't have the words for it before. But that's what it was. It was intensity. And the thing that comes to mind from my story was I remember a lot of musicians, a lot of Christian musicians, but there's this one guy, pastor I listened to named John MacArthur, and he was very, very intense. But also he had a guy in his church that was a Christian musician named Steve Camp. And Steve Camp would literally take John MacArthur's sermons and put them to music. Wasn't all he did, but he did that. And he would talk about the idea, like, if you're a Christian, you can't be living in Laodicea. You cannot be on the fence. You cannot be wanting your white picket fence Christianity. You have to go say, God, I'm willing to give you everything. And I remember I was so excited to finally see Steve Camp in person one time. And you know how in some churches they say, if any of you want to give your life to Christ, like every head's bowed, no one's looking at you, just raise your hand. But you don't be embarrassed, no one's looking at you. Steve Camp did the opposite. He said, if you want to follow Christ, everyone's looking at you. Stand up for Christ right now and be bold in your faith. Don't do this thing where you won't look, I don't want anyone to know I'm standing up for Christ. Do it. You need to be right with God. And it was like, wow, like, yes, that's what we need. And he would talk about being willing to run a mission a yard from the gates of hell and just turning the world upside down. And Isaiah 6, who will go from us? Here, my Lord, send me. And that was like drilled into me, and my, like, whether I don't know if I sort of did it to myself with just people that I was attracted to in my Christian world, but there were certain people, a youth pastor and other people, theologians and preachers. I would do it, and I would think, this is what we need to be about. And you get that intensity, that dopamine rush of like, I'm doing something for the kingdom. And man, once you get past a certain level and you're like, you know what, I'm no longer like going to summer camp and I have like a spiritual high for a week and then I drop and I kind of stay off the mountaintop. I'm on a mountaintop every freaking 3 days or every day and a half. I'm on the mountaintop all the time. My life is a mountaintop for Jesus. And when you get there, man, is it hard to look back. And you also get very arrogant because you're like, what are you all doing down there? Why don't you all get up here on the mountaintop?
Yeah, very intense. You become judgmental. You feel that elitism starts to creep in. We're better than the church down the street that is only preaching about God's love. I started to get into camps where, the Bible wasn't just a book to learn about God's love. It was a manifesto. It was a military, strategy on how to start taking dominion and getting involved in spiritual warfare. And so these things appeal to me. And I really think partially, there's some of it is because of how I was wired, but also that beginnings of how I started to go down the conspiracy theory journey, that I really feel like that impacted the cults and the type of cults that I was a part of. So got to IHOP, immersed myself in this 3-month internship that they had. I took a leave of absence from work, moved out there, got a place. My daughter was participating in it with me. She was about 9 or 10 or something like that. And, and loved it. And they had this whole, something that they call the prophetic history. And so if you are going to be a part of an internship, if you're going to be on staff, if you're going to be a part of any type of leadership position, you needed to know how IHOP started, why it was started, how it was founded. And a lot of that has the story of the leader, Mike Bickle, who, had these so-called mystical encounters with an angel. And he got the idea, the download to start this type of ministry. And, It's 2026, but in 2023, allegations started to come out. I'm long gone at this point, but allegations started to come out about Mike Bickle and sexual assaulting several young ladies in the beginning days, and it just kind of opened up a Pandora's box to zoom in on a lot of predatory, abusive things beyond spiritual abuse. Within IHOP's ranks, from not just Mike Bickle, but subsequent leaders, from the teachings, from the ministry. And you said something about Steve Camp and how he would take the words of John Arthur and MacArthur and put it to music. That happened at IHOP as well. They had the epicenter of IHOP was not just the teachings, it was the prayer room. And 24/7, 2 o'clock in the morning, if you're having a bad dream, you want to be encouraged, you can actually go into the prayer room and just sit in the prayer room, and you would hear music being sung. And they had 2-hour sets, and the new team would switch off. And so when that would happen, they would have a worship with the word set, and they would have an intercession set. But during worship with the word, the team would take scriptures and they would sing them. They would take some of the teachings from Mike Bickle, maybe previous Sundays before, and they would sing it. So this is another layer of, indoctrination. This is another layer of, a hypnotic state that many people got into just being in these spaces. And it was another way of a deeper level of indoctrination, because you're not just hearing it preached, you're not just reading it, you're hearing it connected to music. And so the bond was tighter. And a lot of people, the people came from all over the world to be in this prayer room. And this model was so impactful. And I would say to the more evangelical, kind of right-wing extreme versions of Christianity, that subsequent houses of prayer have popped up all over the globe. Now, Mike Bickle, the founder of the one in Kansas City, was not over all of these subsequent, I don't even know how many there are, but there are a lot of them. You can find one in Egypt and Israel, in the UK. People saw that model and they wanted to bring it back home. And so it's the prayer, it's the fasting, and then they had something called the sacred charge. If you're on staff, if you're involved in an internship, you had to have the sacred charge where you fast for the first 3 days of the month. And so a lot of fasting, a lot of surrendering and dying to self and going lower. And just like Steve Camp was the main singer to do that, seemed like it was a 2-for-1 deal, John MacArthur and then Steve Camp. So then you had Mike Bickle and you had Misty Edwards, who a lot of people will call, I'm going to phrase it this, I would call her the siren of the cults. Her voice, beautiful, melodic, and she would sing these songs and just it echoed, and it just was fused with so much intensity and passion for Jesus, but then preparing for the end times. And I don't know if you know a lot about the eschatology of IHOP, but they didn't believe, okay, things are going to get bad on the planet and then we'll be raptured up. They believed that we would go through the 7 years of tribulation. His bride would still be here. And we're here for a purpose, to be a comparable bride. If Jesus suffered, we're going to suffer, but he's going to need messengers, people who know what's going on. He's going to need people who can have the ability of the gifts of the Spirit to heal the sick and do, healings and things of that nature. So the purpose of coming to the prayer room, leaving your whole life, giving up your whole life and coming into the prayer room is to store up oil, get that spiritual muscle ready and prepared, because whenever it happens, he's going to need his people to be dispersed globally. So a lot of this, all of this ideology was embedded in a lot of people. I know people that left scholarships from Harvard and Yale because they were taught, waste your life for Jesus. It is better to give him your life in your 20s and in your 30s, then maybe go to school. And so I was there for 7 years, infused and immersed in this culture. I was in Kansas City for 7 years. I was always part of IHOP the whole 7 years, but I would say maybe year 3, things started to seem very familiar to me from the first cult I was in. The language, and what the psychological term is, loaded language. Not only did you have to know the prophetic history, they had something called IHOP-ese. So it was the language that was the loaded language that was used, the word salad, that if you were there, you understood. If you didn't, you were like, what the hell are they talking about? And so I consumed all that. But after a while, I started to see how people would basically not sleep, not eat, live a very scarce life so that they could not only please God, but please the leaders. I saw people vying for attention of the, and it just certain things started to seem familiar. And I'm like, wait a minute, where have I seen this before? Didn't call it a cult at first, but it made me start to back up, and it made IHOP seem a little insufficient to me. I wanted the community as much as I wanted these teachings and things of that nature. And so I started to go to offshoots of IHOP. They were smaller in nature. You could be seen. IHOP was big. And this is when things started to get even worse, I would say. It was two ministries in particular, the third and the fourth cult. And we got deep in teachings from bridal mysticism to romanticism with martyrdom. We started to teach, imagining and romanticizing what it would be like to be a martyr for Jesus. And I mean, there were 4-year-olds that were listening to these type of messages as well, too. Lots of fasting, lots of, denying yourself so many things, and then being prepared for the end time. So we did the canning, we did the selling the bonds, we did all these things because, moved in the same areas as each other so we could help each other, because we believed things were going to pop off kind of sooner than later. And so I'll pause right there.
I was gonna say, it reminds me a little bit of JWs. By the way, real quick, it's possible that your setup with StreamYard did not actually connect to your earbuds, but to a different microphone, like on your camera. Because I see sometimes, and you are completely still with your face down. Like right now, it just happened again. There's another microphone I think that it's picked up on, and it's like a. I'll put you on mute for a second, because it's like a little bit of a storm there. I think it's picked up on a different microphone, and I think you may be hitting something that's touching that microphone. I'm not sure if there's a cord or something there, but I think it's probably not this, because I've seen it making noise when you're completely still. So if there's anything you can do to adjust that, or if you want to try the other ones on your earbuds, that's fine too.
Does this sound better? Because I think you're right. I don't know if the default was my AirPods.
It's very crackly at the moment. It sounds like someone's just like playing with the microphone.
That's weird. Hold on.
I'm just gonna put you. Oh, it looks like you already put yourself on mute. Okay. I'll just talk for a second, and then I'll bring you back on mute in a second, off mute. But yeah, I can totally relate to some of this. It's crazy how some of this stuff that I hear from guests, I'm like, yeah, I get it. One of the things that got me was there's a musician named Michael Card. He was an evangelical, and he did he was very influential in my life, but he did a CD that caused a lot of ripples. It was called Brother to Brother, and he did it with a Roman Catholic monk named John Michael Talbot. And John Michael Talbot's music was, of course, Catholic, hyper Catholic, very much in the sort of the monastery kind of life. He had created John Michael Talbot had created a little group called the Little Portion Hermitage, somewhere here in Arkansas, and down here in the South. And people would give up their lives and come to his little hermitage, and he was the main priest, whatever, the main leader of this. But he was very, very good at music, just an amazing man, skilled musically. But they did this CD together called Brother to Brother, and of course the evangelical was like, why are you doing a CD with a Catholic? We're not brother to brother here. They have the false gospel. But I listened to it because I was really curious, because, like, why would Michael Card do this? And I got exposed for the first time to monks and their lyrics and their poetry and their singing. And I dove deeper into it. He had a whole bunch of CDs that he had made over the years, and some of them were like, it was not his music. He was taking ancient mystics from yesteryear in the Catholic Church, monks that would spend their lives in solitude, that were writing poetry to God. And some of this stuff you'd realize was like hypersexual, like about a mystical union with God. And I remember this one, I'll never forget it. The lyrics were like, the man talks about going into a cave with this, and this is like a celibate monk writing this stuff, going into a cave with a lover, and he suspends his lover's senses with his hands. I'm like, oh my God, you're talking about sex or something like that. Like, what is a monk doing? And I realized that they are hypersexualizing their relationship with Christ this way. And I didn't really get into it personally, but I thought that is so fascinating to think that there are Christians who go these sort of Gnostic, esoteric ways with their faith. And to them, the idea of Christ is our our groom and we're the bride, like they kind of mean it in some very, very erratic ways that I didn't ever think about growing up. But I just I'm shocked that you went through some of that. I'm glad that you escaped it. But can I ask what were some of the weirdest things that you'd say you got into that or that you heard that you actually thought, yeah, this is actually sort of the key, where it wasn't like that's weird and it's gonna stay weird, but it's like that's weird, but actually maybe that's the key to what I've been missing this whole time.
No one's ever asked me that. I've I've ingested some weird shit, to be honest, Tim. I look back at it now and I'm just like, oh my gosh. Okay, so I would say the fourth cult. I'm not gonna get too much in it. I want to answer your question, but that was probably the one that was the straw that broke the camel's proverbial back, if you will. And it was still in Kansas City. Like I said, it was an offshoot. The prayer room was still accessible to me. I was still going to services, but this became my home church slash cult for about 2.5 years, maybe three. I don't the timeline. I don't remember. But again, this leader was very into uh, that he had encounters where he would go to heaven and he would be in the spirit realm and he would see certain things, and he was very big on a lot of fasting, 40-day fastings. And I can't believe I'm saying this publicly. Okay, so one time he says this in a service about he was home and he believed in the saints coming and making spiritual appearances like Jeremiah and Moses and different things like that to those who are alive now. And so he said one time he was home and he was in the shower and his wife was just involved with this type of ideology as well too. So she says that she felt like somebody was at the door. She opens the door and she knew it was the presence of, I think it was Elijah. I don't know. And her husband's in the shower and she goes, knocks on the door, and it's like, Elijah's here and he has a message for the prophetic community in Kansas City. And you better get out of here. He needs to give it to you. And so I don't know, he got out the shower and he was, kind of caught up in the spirit realm for a few hours and he started getting all the download. I don't remember what the download was, but he would say this on Sunday service or whatever. There were times we would be in worship and we would be in the spirit, where he would know there are angels in this room right now. There's presence in here for people that need help with addictions, for people that need freedom financially, just receive it. And so this was the weird thing that I'm in a place where I'm like, I'm just going to let it all out everywhere now. There were times where I questioned myself, Tim, because, and this is one of the first things he said to me when I first started becoming a part of that cult, because you couldn't just join it, you had to be invited in. And a friend of mine was the one that said, I think this is your level of where you are right now spiritually. I think this is where you need to be. I trusted her, and it was by invite only. And I went to their prayer night. And you didn't even go to the prayer room, their prayer nights, unless the leader said met with you. I went for a whole month before he decided to prophesy over me. And he said something. He said, and everything was accurate, but he said, you have an ability to know. He said something about there was a calling on my life to undergird pastors and leadership. And that I had like this Saul to David type thing. Interesting that he said Saul, but this Saul to David type thing. And then I would be supporting, pastors and leaders, which I had done a lot of my religious journey. But he said, and you're so in tune with this, it's almost like you would know what they were saying before they would say it. And that has happened like really all my life, even before I've been religious. But when I would be in the services, I would write notes and I would start writing things that came to my mind. And before I finished writing the sentence, the pastor would say it. Now, I never told anybody about that. I didn't understand it, so I wasn't going to expose that to anybody. He picked that up and said it. And so, now I'm like, how did you know that? I'm sold. I'm going to be a part of this ministry, full stop. But I get to my original point, which was, when we were in the spirit and we were worshiping, I would pick things up before he would announce them to the church. I see this, I see that, this is in the room. And I would get the 411 before he would say it. And so when I left that ministry, I struggled a lot with my identity and say, am I like him? am I like these cult leaders? Like, I know he prophesied that over me, but I don't do that to people like what they've done to me. And I struggle because I'm like, well, if spiritually I have this gift where I can do this, then clearly if he saw something and where I saw the same thing, then something's wrong with me. So I just even went down deeper in the rabbit hole of thinking I was a mess and I was, but you know, the whole teachings around martyrdom, like I said earlier, the fifth cult I was a part of was an online cult, and they fused the prophetic, spiritual warfare, intercession, spirit realm with conspiracy theories. So I was home, 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 home. I hated that it was online, but they had what they would call intense weeks where we would meet in different places in the country, and we would pray for America. We would pray for the ending of abortion. Yes, I was very involved in the pro-life movement. I was involved with a lot of ministers who are responsible for influencing the Heritage Foundation, who have created Project 2025 and have a lot to do with where we are right now in this country. That may be for part 2 of a podcast with you, but I went to this fifth cult and I would go to these week-long intensives where we would worship for an hour. And then she would put up an Alex Jones video on YouTube, and she would dissect it and break it down and talk about what the global elite was doing and how we as intercessors needed to know these strategies so we could pray against it from happening. And so I was connected to the leadership with all of that. And, I don't know. I guess it got to the point where I was tired. And I said, that fourth cult was I was still ruminating about a lot of the things, and I was burnt out. And this is when I said, I can't do this anymore. I mean, there's a whole lot more, especially with the fourth cult and, the cult leader being very narcissistic, even maybe sociopathic. I'm not sure, but he connected with me initially. And then, he had me lead out some services, and a lot of people like, oh my gosh, your anointing is similar to his. And once he started hearing people saying that, that's when he flipped on me. He started withdrawing himself. He didn't talk to me anymore. He would walk right past me and not say anything. And for, I think, a series of 6 or 7 months, he did this like a psychological number on me where I thought I was just like the worst of the worst. And it just started to form this whole fraction between us and the leadership. And I started to tear myself down, assuming what I thought he thought about me. And there's more to it. My story is too long to tell in one sitting, but all of that stuff just really, really fractured me. And my daughter was in the school system that was associated with IHOP. Things got bad there, and I started getting sick in Kansas City. And I just said, you know what? I can't do it. I don't want to die here. I need to get out of here. And so that's when I moved to Virginia, where my parents were. And I'm like, okay, I know that family system. I can deal with that. I got to get out of here. And that's how I left. And that's when I started to process all of these different experiences and read and learn and study and cry and cry and grieve and cry, and just really understanding the totality of the groups I was in, the relationships I was in, the things I believed in. Like I said, this year is 10 years since I've been cult free, but I would say the first 5 years of recovery was very intense. Lots of tears and just really trying to untether myself from all that I became, the false self, in order to exist and try to stay safe in these environments.
Yeah. Real quick, I'd love to go to the comments in a second. I just want to ask you one quick question. Would you say this at this point you are in any way going beyond questioning just these individual groups to actually questioning the Christian worldview? Was that like, have you crossed that threshold yet?
Not at that point. Not at that point.
I would love to go to that next. Save that. That'll be the money shot, as they say. Let me go to a few quick comments here, and I'll go through them quickly. If there's anything you want to respond to, just jump right in. But otherwise, I'll just go through them quickly, because a lot of them I think are either they were at a specific point in the story where we moved on from it, or they'll speak for themselves. A lot of people saying hello and thank you, Nikki, for all you do. This is from Susanna over representing Scotland today, the UK. And Mark as well. Mark in the UK representing. Wow, Nikki is involved in good stuff. And see here, world's most handsome potato. Hello, fellow apostate, faithless and fallen. Yeah, that's me. Jade says, hello, glad to catch this interview live. Thank you so much. Let's see here. Deleting says, I'm so over God and his intoxicating religion. Yep. We were told not to be a doormat, but I became one as a Christian. Yep. We were always accepting the abuse of leaders and authorities just because they were the authority. We were conditioned to accept bullying and abuse. Same here. I agree with you. When you worship a narcissistic God, then you're set up to submit to all abuse.
Yeah.
I can relate. Always. Did you want to say any more to that?
No, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, eventually I started to look at things and say, wait a minute. When I left the Kansas City and went home, that's when I realized my mother was a narcissistic, parent. I didn't see that before. I just knew there was issues and dysfunction and all this stuff. It made sense. But then after I left that area and moved to Texas is when I went deeper in my understanding of, wait a minute, now the Bible sounds a little narcissistic in the behavior and the demands and everything like that. And so, I can relate with that comment from Mark.
Yeah. It always amazes me, I'll just say this, it amazes me that those dynamics were not obvious when they should have been. I remember so many times going into church and the song was basically like, you're a good father. It might have been those exact words or something like it, but like, he's such a good father. Then you think he's a good father that drowns his children, that stones his children, that sends snakes to bite them when they disobey and grumble. It's like, wow, like what kind of God do we worship? But you can't see it until you can see it. Jade says, I can relate, always trying to do the right thing or be a good person according to what others told me was right or good. They say Islam means submission, but Christians are taught to submit and surrender agency too.
Yep.
Shell says, Mark, agree the primary theme of most biblical stories is not just morality, but obedience or punishment for pridefulness. One is tied to the other. It's the biggest bait and switch. Self-aggrandizement for the leadership, shame, submission, and self-erasure for the rest of us. Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Olive. Great to see you here. Thank you so much for being here. The logic, God is good, obey God, and authorities put in place by God, therefore obey and you'll be good. God's commands do not always equal good, but despite this, obedience is still number one. Jade says, the cult I was in taught a lot about being under authority and submission was safety, and if you were not in submission, you were not safe. Yeah. And most Christian congregations operated with a cultic control dynamic based on obedience.
Yeah.
Shell says, going forward, and disobedience is punished in the Bible more harshly than immorality. It's a corrupt view, reinforced story after story. Yeah, as if disobedience is the worst thing. We would be taught sermons and read from Deuteronomy 28 often. Yeah. Is that the one about blessings and cursings? I forget what that's.
I think so. I think so. Sounds like it.
Proverbs 3:5-6 so reinforces this core idea: obey even when it doesn't make sense, doesn't seem moral. Mark says, Shell, my mom taught me to learn Proverbs 3:5-8 by heart. Yeah, absolutely. Jade, right? You will be blessed if you just blindly obey, not a healthy or beneficial worldview. Check your brain at the door. Yeah, for sure. I even read a book by a Christian called Don't Check Your Brains at the Door, but we did anyway as Christians. Mark, oh yeah, that was paramount in my flavor of Christianity too. Critical thinking was characterized as prideful. Shell says, they also conflate belief with obedience. Belief should be based on a logical reason for it. To not believe is not to disobey. It didn't just demand outward submission, but inward submission. Yep, that's a good point. Indoctrination works if you teach belief as an obedience issue.
Yeah.
So cringing that we used to sing Trust and Obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Yeah.
Oh, I remember that song.
I think I don't think we'll ever forget that one, and a few others like it. The patriarchy was impossible to question.
Yeah.
And then Shell says, Mark, you weren't even safe in your own mind in that way. Even thoughts could be sinful because sin starts in the heart. So controlling and damaging, it makes you afraid to question even inwardly. And there's some verse I remember, it always got me about, I forget if it was a psalm, but something about God make me aware of presumptuous sins or forgive me for presumptuous sins. And it's like, you had this idea that like, you might be sinning by accident, not just like commission, but omission, of course, but also just like accidentally, like, almost like a, like as if for a guy who had like a nocturnal emission or something, like you didn't even mean to masturbate. You masturbated accidentally at night. So like, you're still a bad person. Jade says freedom from thought policing. Yep. Not being safe in your own mind. It takes time to break free. Susanna says that's the song. Shell's going in my head just now. It's funny. I had someone recently tell me to stop quoting any Christian songs because that they say once we quote them, they get in our heads for a couple of days. I apologize. I know it does happen. Um,
Mhm.
Music is the great way to reinforce and ensure teachings and be remembered. It's a mnemonic device for learning and memory. Yep. Mark says, hey guys,
That's
remember that
important.
first day you suddenly owned your rebellious instincts? Breaking free was suddenly so liberating. Yeah.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
wonderful fuck you, God moment. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and really, it's not even like, it's especially when you realize it's not even God we're talking to. It's more like, fuck the culture
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
Christianity and the worldview. It's because you're like, I'm not even, there's no God to say fuck you to. He's not there.
Right.
Um,
Right.
uh, Shell says, yep, my husband and I went through a delayed teenagehood. The teenage years
Mhm.
are a developmental stage where you question and define your own identity, but we were
That's
never
right.
allowed that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
Shell says, my heart breaks for her, for you.
Mhm. Thank you, Shell.
Mark says, delayed teenagehood. That sounds hilarious. Wish I'd had a companion for that celebration. My ex didn't rebel. We split. Oh,
Mhm.
I'm sorry. I
Mhm.
would say just a quick, I'm not sure if this is exactly the way you all mean it, but I think in some ways too, the delayed teenagehood could in some ways be like just the general maturity that we should all go through in that time frame. We don't go through it because we're kind of stuck.
Mhm.
Whatever they talk about, whatever at whatever point your trauma started in life, you kind of get stuck there. And if you're going to really heal, you kind of have to go back to that age. I would argue for a lot of us that's like age 5 to 8. So we didn't even get
Mhm.
the teenage hood years in our own life. We're 50 years old and we're still learning to be teenagers.
It's so true.
Nikki, your hair is beautiful.
Thank you, Mark.
Jade says that is such a hard thing to go through, Nikki. Yeah, I think
Mhm.
you're going through some of the harder parts of your story with the first church. That shame
Mhm.
can't define you now.
That's right.
Deleting says, I'm so with you on that. I feel that same exact way where I constantly tend to feel unsafe in my own mind. I want to break free from this religion.
Mhm.
Christian pro-life values are so superficial, hypocritical, and performative. And my own body as well, having the actual Holy Spirit, he's harmful, and I'm tired of being expected to never feel or be angry at him for all of his bullying. Yeah. Couldn't have a baby shower. What the hell?
I
Exactly.
know, right?
It's a painful process. I'm so glad someone else can relate, and thank you for understanding as well. Um, Mark says, deleting, you are at home in this space.
Mhm.
Shell talking as well too, deleting, I was where you are now with feeling you need to leave. It was a scary and unsure time because I had always believed, but I am very glad I went through that difficult deconstruction process. It's
Mhm.
hard, but worth it. Mark says, I'm still in need of a teenager stage to discover my authentic self. Yeah, a lot of us
Yeah.
are. Shell says, my system wanted that intensity. Wow, that's a powerful thought for why we may have stayed in something more high control. The low
Mhm.
control didn't feel right to us because we were told all or nothing. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. When
That's
you're
a good
told if
point.
you're, what's the word? Lukewarm, you're going to get spewed out of his mouth. I mean,
Spewed out.
that's,
Exactly. Exactly.
we were taught black and white, all or nothing, belief or disbelief, obey or disobey, and both extremes had extreme consequences, false dichotomies to polarize the choices. Yep, you're
Mhm.
so right. Before the cult I was in, I was always searching for that intensity. Perfect way to describe it. A
Mhm.
lot of comments today. This is great. I appreciate you all. I was monitoring the comments for trolls, but I wasn't necessarily reading all the comments. You all have a lot to say. I appreciate you being part of our community, everyone.
Mhm.
Shell says, Mark, do it. I'm rooting for you. We all need that testing phase we weren't allowed to or didn't allow ourselves to have, as long as riskiness doesn't equal disregard for safety or health. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. The other few months ago, I was talking to a therapist, not like in a therapy session, just like just a friend, but 101. And they were literally like, Tim, honestly, you're going through a lot of stuff. You know what you really need? You just need to go get laid.
Yeah. Listen,
Thanks so much.
I I love that. I love
just,
that advice.
just go get it. Mark says, Shell, I did try drinking and smoking, but quickly realized they didn't work for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
My cult leader had often talked about all of the churches being counterfeit. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. The whole
Mhm.
poisoning of the well. I
Mhm.
think I need to learn to regulate my own nervous system without the manufactured intensity and manipulation.
Yes. Yes.
Shell says, I
Mhm.
almost got a tattoo, but then remembered I'm a scaredy cat.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, it's important to remember, God only likes debt-free, untattooed virgins, right? um, what's that? That's some phrase like that I've heard come through Christianity. Let's see here. I am thinking about an atheism symbol tattoo. Yep. Yep. I'm sure you can get those. I started seeing a therapist who helps those with religious trauma, which has helped so much. Still
Good,
working on it.
good. Because it's hard to find them these days, even in 2026. So if you found one, good for you. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and honestly, I think I've been to enough therapists over the years that I think there's a part of us that gets stuck in the trauma of being triggered by therapists that aren't any good or that lead us
Yes.
down the wrong path. Where you're like, I think I need therapy, but it's kind of like being in an abusive relationship. Like I'd
Mhm.
rather be single, and
Right,
therapy can
right.
kind of be like that. It's a hard thing to go through.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, check out the zones of regulation and occupational therapy regulation strategies, such as deep pressure, proprioceptive input. I probably misread that. Proprioceptive input, etc. Thanks for the input and support. I just started therapy, so I'll ask about these things. Jade, I also got therapy from a secular therapist after leaving. It was very helpful. She helped me see I
Yes.
didn't have to view everything in black and white terms and helped me not spiral existentially. Leaving an Ivy League scholarship, that's a sign of cultic influence. I would agree. That one group sounded a lot like Gnostic beliefs. It's how they created inner circle and enlightenment that people are trying to attain, keeps them tuned in, yearning for acceptance. I couldn't
Yeah.
imagine working that hard for something and then feeling like you have to give it up. That's awful. The things we did to try to attain acceptance, enlightenment, closeness with God, invite only equals method of control, feeling of privilege that you want to try to keep. If you're a deep thinker, they'll tell you you're a visionary, special, set
Yeah.
apart, makes you feel important. Yeah, the cosmic love bombing. It's
Mhm.
amazing what kooky experiences people get when they start to live in this mystical mindset. The imagination is a
Mhm.
powerful thing. If
Mhm.
everyone else in your life is telling you you're a mess and you have low self-esteem, it's easy for them to do this. It's crazy, but it's
Absolutely.
a testament to the power of confirmation bias, groupthink, etc.
Yep. Yep.
Very smart people fall into these things.
Yep.
Shell, that was me. Delusions of spiritual grandeur.
Mhm.
They want highly intelligent people too. It helps validate their beliefs and practices. Yeah, you see that a
Mhm.
lot with young Earth creationism. They want to find scientists that will say the Earth is 6,000 years
Yep.
old. Like, we have a scientist that says it, and he's got a PhD, so it must be right.
Yep.
If we've been put down repeatedly by parents or others, we know we aren't bad like that. So when someone affirms we're not bad, that we're intelligent, it's special, etc., it's like we cling to them.
Mhm.
True. Sometimes smart people are clever at self-delusion.
Mhm.
Let's see here. Just a few more, and we'll get back to your story. I think I tried to become intelligent as a survival tactic and to show I was worth something. So when people love bombed me and affirmed my intelligence, it ensnared me. I was always the
Mm.
kid that craved academic praise from my teachers as a surrogate for parental love and unconditional acceptance that parents provide. If you think about it, the acceptance of God is another way we seek our parental acceptance and love. Yeah. Yeah. Mark says I was teacher's pet too. It's so
Mm.
cathartic to be doing this. Yeah. Um,
Mhm.
see here. Or love acceptance we should have gotten from parents. Yeah.
Yep.
We all do, Tim. Yep. We all just need to get laid. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you all so much. We'll come back to any comments at the end that come in from this point on. But if you could, Nikki, this is a great segue just to the rest of your story. What, after you went back to Virginia, you did some soul searching. What was it like at that point? Did you ever get caught up in another cult? And how did this transfer into just eventually looking at the whole worldview completely?
No, I didn't. But realizing that, still 10 years out, I have a propensity. I understand that. Just kind of like, people who have been abusing drugs or alcohol, you understand your bandwidth. Then, so, and it's very easy in 2026 to get caught up in all types of cultic communities these days. People think they're still thinking brick and mortar. And if it's not taking place in a building, then, it's not cultish. But I've seen people get caught up by spiritual narcissists and things of that nature online. And they're following certain influencers and, they're telling them what to think and how to live. And, they're the best thing since sliced bread. And a lot of people get caught up in that. And so there, I have my own inner compass where I say, okay, Nick, what are we doing here? But then I also have friends that I love and they understand my story. And I've given them permission to call me out. And, I have my forms of accountability because at the end of the day, I don't want to get swept back into anything. I don't just say, okay, well, I have education, I have training, I'm helping clients. I understand my human propensity and I understand my past. And so that helps me to be level-headed about it and not pretend that I'm above being swept away, especially in the age of fake news and, information, AI and so many things. It's hard to distinguish what truth is, what reality is. And so, I judge myself, not judge, maybe that's not a good word to say, but, I check in, I check in my compass. I see where I'm going. If I'm immersed on social media with a particular person all the time, and now my thoughts sound like their thoughts, I'm like, okay, hold up, what's going on here? And so I check myself, and like I said, and I connect with others where I feel like safe to share with them and safe to hear their opinions and their assessment of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. But if something keeps on hitting your mic still, I don't know if there's something with if there's a cord. Sometimes I have like a big cord behind my monitor. something's wiggling your microphone a lot.
I do not know. I am so sorry for all the technical difficulties,
No worries. It
Tim.
literally just happened as you started saying this. So whatever you just did as you started saying that, literally that's when it happened. As you said,
Okay.
I'm sorry it's happening. Literally, whatever you did. So if there's any way you can figure it out, but
I'm trying
yeah,
to make sure, on the AirPods and not.
okay, no worries. Yeah, it is crazy. Well, you did though at some point move from that point of just realizing that you had an extensive past being exposed to and being susceptible to cults. You did eventually move to questioning Christianity as a whole, right?
I did. I hate to say that I had somewhat of a spiritual experience. I don't know if you want to call it that. I really don't know how to define it, but I mean, over time, I had these thoughts, and a reminder that my daughter was involved with all these cult systems as well too, from being in my stomach and my womb to being a part of all these different cults. She was there with me. So by the time I left Kansas City for good, she was a teenager, and she ingested a lot of this material too. And so when I left and moved to Virginia, we eventually got a place, she and I, and there was a part of me that said, you know what? Her process and how she untangles this, that is sacred. Now, if she needs help, I'm always here, but I don't want to touch that. I want her to have her own autonomy on how she wants to work through this. So we didn't talk much about the experience. We just kind of stayed present. And I didn't talk to her where I was, but I was getting to that point where, you know, I didn't want to rely on the Bible anymore. I didn't want to, do some of the expressions of faith that I was used to. All of it just felt so traumatic. The Bible was a weapon. Worship, I think somebody mentioned it earlier. I don't know if it was Shell, about the power of music and how it reinforces a lot of these narratives and these ideologies, and it gets seared in our conscious in even a deeper way. And so for many people, this is why they get triggered when they go back to church, or hearing worship music. I remember when I tried to go to my parents' church when I moved to Virginia first time, and, I felt safe enough with the leader that it wasn't going to be anything crazy that I came out of. But I went to the worship time, and they were singing songs that were started and originated out of IHOP. I mean, nobody knew I was going to be there. And so I found myself in the bathroom, crying, like, I can't do this. So I waited until the worship time was over, and then I went back, and, I felt like I was in a place of a right mind to be able to hear what the message was, and started to decide, I don't believe that. That's questionable. And I guess psychologically created something that I call my life shelf. And what that is, in essence, is, as I was starting to unpack and deconstruct, I realized there were so many themes. There was so much ideology I ingested, and I didn't know how I felt about a lot of things. I didn't know how I felt about heaven or hell, about the spiritual world, spiritual warfare, the prophetic. Is this stuff real? Or somebody pulling my leg? Like, I had so many questions, and I said to myself, you know what? You're not going to get all these answers right now. It may take years to get your answers. And so I kind of, not literally, but metaphorically, made a shelf with certain themes. And I said, you know what? That stays up there. So things like the prophetic, that stayed up there for a long time. I would try to touch it every now and then, but my nervous system wasn't ready to actually unpack that. Things like heaven and hell, that took a long time for me to touch. I think once you hit that area, then you're like, whew, that's like 80 pounds of weight just comes off of you. But there's certain themes and certain beliefs that I just knew I had to wait for my nervous system to be more regulated. I had to wait till, I say this term with my clients, I had to wait till I got my legs grew, so I can stand up and have courage to actually face some of these belief systems, sift through them to determine, are these my beliefs? Or are these someone else's beliefs? And what am I going to do about it? How do I feel about it? Like I said earlier, I was involved heavily in the pro-life movement. I wasn't going to, rallies at different cities in the country for 12 to 13-hour prayer rallies of prayer and fasting on different things regarding the politics of America. I went to the White House, and not the White House, but the Capitol and the mall and all these different areas, and have life tape over my mouth. and prayed for the ending of abortion and the halting of things for the LGBTQ IA plus community. I mean, I was involved in all this stuff because I believed a lot of the rhetoric that was taught, especially in IHOP, that these are the two things that were important on the heart of God: ending abortion, overturning Roe v. Wade, and halting the advancement of certain things and benefits for the LGBTQ. They consider all of these things sinful, and it was our job as his bride on the planet to help him break this stuff off of America so God could come back and send revival. And so I was involved in all that stuff. So these things sat on my shelf. And I didn't rush, I didn't force myself. And how my deconstruction journey started, because I was very end time oriented, all I kept thinking about was, how am I going to heal? But I still have to keep up this laundry list of things to make sure if the end times ever pops off, I'll be ready. Or if I die, that I don't go to hell. I can't. So I just said, look, I can't hold all of this. I'm not going to hold all of it. So if I wind up going to hell in the process of trying to get better, so be it. I just got to that point. And once I did, that kind of took a weight off of my shoulders, and I allowed myself to slowly unpack things. I started watching documentaries. The one with Leah Remini on Scientology was so helpful for both myself and my daughter. At the time, even though I wasn't in Scientology, there were so many similarities. And, we just did a lot of grieving, a lot of crying. Ironically, my mom was like, what's going on with you? Like, you need to get back on the horn, like get back on the saddle. Why aren't you in church? And she did not understand. And when I tried to, educate her, and I think we probably all have had some type of experience with that, trying to educate our loved ones about, spiritual abuse and, high control groups and religious trauma. They look at us like a deer in headlights. They're like, what are you talking about? And, later on, I realized there are people on this planet that love me and I love them, but they don't have the capacity to understand. I used to get angry in the beginning, like, if you love me, research it. All you got to do is read an article. But then I realized, sometimes people, especially if they're still in it, they don't want to see it, because then they're going to start questioning. They don't want to be brought to that process. And you know what? I have to respect their, autonomy to say, I don't want to be brought into that process. So, lost a lot of relationships. And I was kind of in the hallway, the dark hallway, if you will, from leaving this world, leaving these belief systems, leaving this particular faith. And it's like, okay, now what do I do? And, I feel like I lived in that hallway for years by myself at first, but then eventually I started to find other people who were kind of in that same process. And those became my people. Those became my family. Those became my community. And I started to learn how to redefine community. Because when you're in the church, everything, you said it earlier, Tim, everything is there. Life and godliness. You need a mechanic, brother so-and-so is a mechanic. You need somebody to watch your kids, sister so-and-so has a daycare. You don't even they won't even charge you. So when you leave out, it's like, well, who's going to be my mechanic? How do I think? How do I function? How do I relate with other people? And I didn't have community in the beginning, the first part of my journey. I would say a good 4 or 5 years. It was just me and these books and going to therapy, but they did not know what to do with me. But I had PTSD, complex PTSD. And so I still needed it, but I did a lot of the education myself. I read and I cried and I write and I journal. But now community is, Mark and Shell and, Jade and different people that are in the chat. It's Tim. It's the resources that are on social media, the people that are speaking out, that is to some degree, some form of community, because we have shared experiences and we get it. Right. And so I'm kind of going further than what we probably wanted to pace it. But, just thinking about all that.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Can I ask, where have you landed at this point with how you see Christianity? Would you, for example, would you say that it's mythology and irrelevant to your life, or does it still hold a place in your life at all?
No, it doesn't. I don't consider myself a Christian. I don't consider myself to have any type of affiliation to any religion. I would say that I probably am a little bit more spiritual in nature, and a lot of science. There's some things I still read and consider, but I'm not functioning in any any form of organized religion or spirituality, I like being ambiguous. I like not having a title or a label, because I often think people use that as a way to decide if they can relate with you or not, if they're going to decide if you're an enemy or you're a brother or a sister. And so, in the beginning, I used to feel pressure from people those first few years. They would reach out to me. Where's Nikki the intercessor? Where's Nikki the dream interpreter? We want that Nikki back. And I was scared in the beginning, but after a while I said, she's dead. You're not getting her back. Guess what? I'm not getting her back. If I'm not getting her back, you're not getting her back. And I hated that version of me died initially, because that's all I knew. And so that period of time between she's dead, but now who am I now? That was very scary. And that was a time where I didn't have a lot of people that I could connect with to help answer those questions. And looking back at it now, that was perfect. I needed to answer those questions for myself. I needed to look within, which in a lot of these Christian teachings, a lot of it is the sinful nature. It's ugly in there, your righteousness is as filthy rags. And so I was afraid to look within, and now I love it. Now I have rebuilt a lot of, who Nikki is now, and I love who she is now. But back then, when the final straw, when I just let that version, the intercessor, the Black church, they call it armor bearer, and the person who was walking alongside ministers, and the one who was involved in all these spiritual warfare, I let it go. And it felt like somebody was taking like a root system, almost like taking your nervous system out of you. And can you hear me?
Yeah. It's just amazing. I love that description.
Yeah. And so, I remember crying in a fetal position for weeks off of that. But then I wiped my tears and I said, okay, I don't know how to rebuild my life, but I'm going to try. And I slowly started the process of, before I try to love myself, before I even try to like myself, let me start to learn to know myself. And so I started to take an assessment on things that I like, things that I enjoy, things that I don't like, things that I question. Am I still pro-life? What do I think about that whole ideology? Is that a farce? Is it something that's very disserving to people and women's autonomy and their ability to choose for themselves? What do I think about the LGBT? Is it demonic, or all this stuff that was ingested? I started to question, and I think people in their process they check out when it comes to this part, because this is heavy duty. Some people call it shadow work, where you start to sift through your own belief systems and then even assess, was this belief ever mine, or grandma gave it to me? And I took the ball and I kept running with it. And I never even peered in to look at where this belief system originated with. Does it connect with who I am? Is it loving towards people on the planet? Like, I didn't take the time. So during those dark years when nobody else could help me, this is what I was doing. And I'm still doing. There's a lot of books that are off my life shelf now. I've sifted through some of these and kind of have some type of stance on what I think and I believe. I'm not a pro-lifer anymore. I don't believe that it's demonic to be a part of LGBTQ IA plus community, to have a different sexual orientation than what patriarch upholds. I don't believe in a lot of these things anymore, and I'm proud to say that. I like the version of me that can sit down and have coffee with anybody in this space online. I can sit down and have coffee and great conversations with a Satanist. I'm not afraid of your belief system, because that's your belief system. And I'm not trying to impose my belief system on you. Sure. Am I still curious, Tim? Absolutely. I love curiosity. It's helped me to explore outside of Christianity, but I'm not trying to get you to think like Nikki thinks. That's ugly. That's scary. And even with my clients, what do you think? What do you believe? And some of them like, I don't know. That's all right. We can sit here until you get to the point that you can at least be curious about it. There is no rush to figure out what you want to affiliate with, who you want to be. You don't have to put a label on yourself. Just be and start to learn to like yourself. And soon enough, you may start to know yourself, like yourself, and then love yourself. And that's when you start to really enjoy life, at least I think, regardless of what's going on the planet. Things can
Yeah.
be crazy, but internally, I have built a place, an anchor for myself. It's great if I connect with safe people, great if I connect with safe communities, healthy communities. But at the end of the day, I like coming home to myself because that's where I now found peace and safety. And, I'm growing and all of that. But yeah.
I love it. You reminded me of the with what you just said about being an anchor, about that song, "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing," and
Yes.
like you
Tim,
become
you
your
know
own.
the songs.
Oh yeah, they're in there.
Uh-huh.
You just think to yourself like, I am in a sense. I mean, I hate to say it this way because I know it makes us cringe from our time in Christianity to say this, but like you become your own savior, not in
Yeah.
the Christian sense, but
Yeah.
you become that you have to rescue yourself in a sense. And it sounds
Yeah.
like when you realize that no one else is going to do it, Jesus is not real, God is not real. No one else is going to save you, not for eternity, but just for this one
Come on.
life.
Come
You
on.
gotta, you gotta do it. You gotta step up. And I love too how in my story, I know I haven't shared my story yet, but I love too how our kids often become our saviors. For me, I did not
Mm.
question anything until we were sitting around one day at night doing Bible time with the kids, and we're singing a Christian song called Joshua Fought the Battle of Jericho. Have you ever heard that?
Yes.
It's about this basically the conquest of Canaan,
Mhm.
and it's a fun kid song, and we're all dancing and singing. The kid, I learned quickly the kids don't want to sing songs quietly; they want to dance to the songs and twirl. So we're dancing around, we're getting almost dizzy singing these songs. Jesus loves me, the Bible, all that stuff. We get to
Mhm.
Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and literally, like that night, for the first time ever in my life, this was back in 2016. For the first time in my life, something in me said, "Wait a second. If you're singing Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, you're at some point going to have to explain to your kids what that song's about. You're going to have to explain to them genocide, land theft, slavery, child bride, stoning, genital mutilation, and you're going to have to defend it in the name of God and say this is a good thing." And literally, it took me 3 years from that point. It should have taken me about 5 minutes, but it took me 3 years to deconstruct and deconvert. But it's like even I became my savior, but my kids became my savior. It's amazing how it works. Um, I did want to ask a couple more questions here, and then we're going to go to some comments. I also want to leave some time to, at the very end, to talk about your platforms. But um, you mentioned your mom was at one point trying to get you to get back in the fold. What was it like when you began to be public instead of just keeping these thoughts to yourself and said, you know what, I'm not going back to church, and there's a reason why. How did the Christians treat you, and did you have any constructive conversations, or were they all toxic?
No, everybody wound up walking away. When you start to challenge things, you start to have a difference of opinion. I say they look at you like you have spiritual leprosy or something. And It was hard then, so hard then. I realized within a lot of churches and sometimes in a lot of organized religion, these friendships and relationships that are formed, they're like pseudo relationships. You really learn if they're real once you leave, regardless of belief system. But, in a lot of these organized religions, you are trained to be involved in groupthink. Everybody has to think the same. And if someone were to divert from that thinking, then they are the enemy and we have to remove ourselves from them. When I left the first cult, I remember being at a supermarket near the house of the cult leader. And I ran into my daughter's grandfather. And at this time, my daughter must have been like, I don't know, maybe 6 or 9 months. I had her in the carrier and everything, and he walked right past me and my daughter as if he did not even know me. He didn't know us. That's his own grandchild. But when I left, him and his wife, the main leader, started to tell people to leave me alone, that the enemy had taken hold of me, and that I was going through this whole demonic possession, and that everybody needed to stay away for their own protection of me, because I started questioning things. I started talking to some of the people that I knew before that I got involved in that church and say, listen, this is what happened to me. And some people did it for survival of the fittest, and I at the time it was hard, but later on I realized, okay, you were trying to survive, so I get it. But many people those relationships ended up fading and dissolving. And I look at it now in hindsight, it's kind of what I needed. So I could truly be by myself to evaluate what I've been through, the type of introjects or beliefs that I started to believe based off of, being up under certain coverings and churches and family systems and grandma and grandpa and things of that nature, and start to challenge these belief systems. And I couldn't do it in the company of people that still thought and reflected notions of what I came out of. I needed to be with Nikki. And I understand that now, but back then it was very, very hard because I loved hard. I loved well, at least I tried to. And so I lost a lot. To this day, I don't think I even connect with really anybody that's from IHOP over time. They just, faded. But I'm okay with that. I actually meet survivors now of IHOP that I didn't know when I was there. And it's like we can obviously connect, but my life was changing. The chapter was moving from chapter 10 to chapter 11 now. And I needed that freedom to fully disconnect. There was external disconnection with these relationships fading, but also that internal that came after that when it was just me. And there was a part of me where it's like, listen, I'm not dying in this, okay? Like, I'm not losing myself. I have a daughter I have to raise. This is not going to be my story for the rest of my life. This is chapter 10. We're going to chapter 11. There's 20, 30 chapters left to be written. And I'm not going to allow myself to be marked and just, marred by my experiences. I want my life back. I want my mind back. I want my freedom back. I want my autonomy back. And so, I've had people even say, Nikki, you always learning something. You always reading something. You're always trying to figure stuff out. I'm like, and what's wrong with that? Like, that has helped me to maintain resilience. That has helped me to fight, to say, I went to this gathering last week, and I don't know if you're familiar with the author Daniela Young. She's the author of some books called Uncultured, and then The Culting of America.
Oh, yes. Yes. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
A brain fart there. Yeah, I've interviewed her. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. I think she's been. Yeah. And so I met her in person last week, and I was talking to some people there, and I was telling this guy some of my story, a way shorter version than what we've been doing here today. But he interrupted me and says, "I don't believe this. You're kidding me. The person that's in front of me does not seem like what you're saying." And I said, you know what? I'm going to take that as a compliment. Thank you. I appreciate that. I've worked hard over these 10 years to find Nikki, and all the life rubble and all the spiritual abuse rubble and the cult rubble and the narcissism, and everybody kind of having their pen and writing in my book of life, so to speak. I have the pen now. I own my story. I own my today, my present, and my tomorrow. And it feels good, But to go back to your original question, I didn't start sharing any of this until 2020. Before then, I wouldn't even let anybody know I was in one cult, let alone 5. And so, the pandemic happened. We were all locked in. And then I got involved with the social audio app Clubhouse. And I started going into these rooms. For those of you that don't know how it's wired, it's like all different types of rooms or groups where you could just go in on any topic, from cooking to sports to politics to religion. And I found some rooms on narcissism. And so I started going in there and listening. And then I decided to open my mouth and share. And I started talking about religious narcissists and sharing my story. And people were like, whoa, wait a minute. This sounds familiar. I can relate to this. And then I kept sharing. And then over time, I said, okay, I think I need to hang out in this app for a little bit. And so I started a club there called Spiritual Abuse and Cults. And I ran that space for like 2 years. And there were times we had rooms for like 6 or 7 hours. And people were just coming in because this is the first time there was language to their experience. This is the first time they're meeting other people that say, oh my goodness, I went through that too, but no one's ever talked about this. And I met a lot of Black people in that space. And that is kind of what prompted me to kind of start the work of doing the podcast, Surviving the Black Church, and then subsequently starting a support group that we meet on meetup.com. And we've been doing that for the past couple of years. Just had a meeting last night, and, kind of strengthening those in the Black community, because there is other sets of things that the Black survivors of cults or high demand groups or religious abuse have to sift through when it comes to Christianity. So yeah.
Could I ask, just you mentioned the Black church there. I meant to ask that before we get too close to the end.
Okay.
Can you just say a quick word about some of the things that you've observed that seem to be in the Black church? This in terms of like if someone is truly trying to get out, or they're at least just thinking, they're not deconverting yet, they're just deconstructing, saying there's some red flags here, either in the church or with my worldview, my faith system, whatever it is, whatever level. Like, what are the things that you've noticed that don't seem to be as prevalent of an issue in typically white denominations, white congregations, that make it a little bit more complicated for people in the Black church to do that? Because it seems like in some ways, from like I remember listening to one of your videos recently in preparation for this, and you mentioned to somebody that something like 8 out of 10 Black Americans identify as Christians according to some polls. If that poll is anywhere near accurate, 80% of Black Americans saying we're Christians, that's a lot of, just like, if you're not in it, you're really an outsider at that point. What are the pressures that Black people face in terms of deconstruction?
Yeah, and that statistic comes from Pew, PEW Research Center. And when I saw that statistic years ago, I was floored. I mean, I knew it was a lot theoretically, but like I didn't know it was 80%. Like that's huge. And so, but it makes sense. You know, I can go to any coffee shop or go to Target or something as a Black person, and you know, I'm in line, I'm giving a hypothetical, I'm in line and I bump up against the person in front of me, and you know, as an accident, and it's a Black person, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, I apologize, you know, or you know, don't worry, God's blessed me, God's gonna bless you, you know, how you doing today? Oh, I'm blessed and I'm highly favored. It's just all this loaded language just comes out, and there's an assumption that if you are Black, you are automatically Christian. You know, we're not a monolith, but within the Black community, there is an assumption that we are, that it, you know, and so because of that assumption, it's really hard to navigate in spaces where, you know, and encounters with people where they kind of accept, like, you're not a Christian, what is that all about? You're an atheist, what's that all about? Oh, you're into spirituality, what's that all about? No, we're Black, we're supposed to be in church, you know. And the hardship of untangling these tethers, I mean, you've heard a lot of my story, but if you want to add insult to injury, so to speak, because of us being enslaved. And, you know, we talk about autonomy, we talk about choice. Many of us might have came into Christianity because our parents were in it and that's how we got involved. But for a Black person, we had our own forms of spirituality and connecting with the earth, connecting with the cosmos. Some of y'all may or may not believe it, but this is what we had. And when we were brought over here, that was stripped from us. And the enforcement of Christianity by the, you know, the enslavers, this was intentional. It was intentionally introduced to support the system of slavery. So we need to keep you subservient so we can use you, and we will use the means of Christianity and God. Since you seem like spiritual people, we're going to give you this. And then I don't know if, of those of you that are familiar, there is such a thing called the Slave Bible. And there's not too many copies that are left. I think Fisk University owns one of the copies, and a lot of the passages about freedom and demonstrations of God, you know, helping the Israelites come out of Egypt, and anything dealing with freedom and God loving us like that, those were omitted. But passages about, you know, submit to your masters, submit to your leaders because they have watch over your soul, things that seemingly endorse slavery were kept in. And so, you know, slavery was framed as God's will for us as a people. You know, spiritual justification for oppression was, God wants this for you. And so that suffering, the theology of suffering was embedded in us, you know, genetically it's been passed down in our bloodlines. And so there's just an assumption, if you're Black, grandma, mom, dad, grandma, uncle, aunts, or whatever, this is just what you do. You don't sift through and make choice. Even when you become an adult, when you can have more of an autonomy to decide what you want to believe, that's something that's not challenged. You're shunned away from doing that, you know, and any resistance to Christianity, to the faith, is framed as sin. is framed as displeasure to God. And so we were also taught during that time to obey. You want to live, you want your family to live, you got to obey and obey your master. So in essence, there is a foundation for us as a people, Black America specifically, that God loves us to be enslaved. These are the internalized beliefs that He wants us to be enslaved. That the hierarchy of who and what is important is whiteness. It's not blackness. We are at the bottom, and we see some of these notions systemically spread throughout systems in America to this day. But I hear a lot of people say, I hear so many Black people, they go through this decolonization process and they decolonize everything else except Christianity, because this is really hard. It's your spiritual identity and the racial hierarchy that's set up in America is infused together, is intertwined together. So there's an illusion that, okay, the enslavers defined what God's will was. They defined what who should be superior, who should be inferior. And so when you're trying to unravel all of these different things that are enmeshed, it's harder because your identity is there. And so, things like, for instance, in early forms of slavery, reading was not permitted. Learning how to read was not permitted. Some slave masters actually taught some of their enslaved how to read the Bible. And then there were some that escaped and went to the North and they learned how to read, and some of them came back. Black people came back. They were free, and they tried to help those who were in the South learn how to read, and the Bible was how they cut their teeth. So can you imagine your form of learning language and understanding is submit to your leaders, obey your masters? So there is a trauma bond that my people have with Christianity, with the Bible in particular. Another form of how we learned how to read was through oratorical readings. And in the Black church, you were a musician, so I'm pretty sure you can attest to this. A lot of the gospel songs are very repetitive, right? They will say the same statement or sentence over and over again. Well, that comes from helping those to read by hearing it repeated and over again. Then there's a call and response style that's very typical in a Black church. You sing a phrase, Tim, and then I repeat it back. And then you sing a phrase and I repeat it back. And we learned this model from learning how to adapt to the language and learning how to read. So our history with Christianity is totally different than any other people group in America. And a lot of it was not challenged, it was assumed. And for the most part, you think of all the way back then till now, we as a people, I feel like we learned to transmute a lot of things. And what we did was we tried to transmute the significance of Christianity, the significance of the Bible, to make it our own. But there was little to none sifting and evaluating, okay, what is the origin? What is the core of this? What are the similarities between, who gave us this faith, who gave us this religion, and what's in the Bible? So many often don't do that. They just coexist in these churches where abuse is normalized. In most Black community, you will find a storefront church like the first cult I was in, and mostly every corner, sometimes 2 or 3 on the same street. It is so typical you might party on Saturday night, but you get yourself up, whether you got a hangover or not, and go to some house of the Lord. And I'm going to endorse this movie because it's very indicative to what I'm sharing right now. The movie Sinners, if you have not seen it, very, very powerful movie. I'm not really into vampires and scariness, but the message that was there, and just how that young man had to choose himself or choose religion and choose what his father wanted for him, to be in the house of God or to cling to who he was and to find who he was. And so, if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's really, really good. But, these are some of the things that is hard for the Black community. So when they're trying to untangle all these things, that, and disconnect it, it's not a clean break. It never is a clean break. The disentanglement process is very, very tedious, very laborious, and a lot of people give up. And because of this, when I was in Clubhouse and I would hear a lot of Black Americans share their stories, there was one lady that came in, and she was a child during the Jim Jones cult. And she happened to not be on the base, her and a few other friends, I forget for what reason. They returned to see majority of the people had died, but she talked about her experiences being in the Jim Jones cult, and majority, about say 90% of the Jim Jones cult members were Black. So, he came in very easy with socialistic type of ideas and justice for the Black people. And it was very easy to manipulate a lot of us. And, but there's so much to untangle. But I say all that to say, after doing those 2 years in Clubhouse, myself and my colleague realized we need spaces where we can unpack this stuff. It's not that we're trying to be, separatists or, we're better than anybody else. We need space to untie all of these tethers, because it connects with historical trauma. It connects with, genetics. It connects with the family system. And there's so many tethers and there's so much to unpack. But, we have the podcast, Surviving the Black Church podcast. Season 1 we did a few years ago. Season 2 just dropped. And we have the support group where we talk about, some of these things amongst each other and just how to heal and how to move forward after all of this.
Well, you gave me the perfect segue there. That was my last question, was just about that podcast. For anyone that's able to jump in there and look at those, and anyone that doesn't know what we're talking about, just look beneath this video. All the links are there for how to connect. I'd love to have you connect there with Nikki. But what is that podcast all about, and sort of what are your hopes for the future in terms of your platforms? What can people expect? And then could you also just maybe add in a word about if anyone wanted to connect with you, either through these podcasts or also one-on-one, like other options? How do people connect with you if they wanted, if you're open to, if you do therapy, if you're taking new clients and so forth? Give us a little plug for all that.
Yeah, the first season for Surviving the Black Church was more about a lot of psychoeducation. I believe, and my colleague believes, that a lot of the recovery process for those in the Black community, psychoeducation is paramount. There's just a lot of these things that I discussed today we don't know. A lot of these things, we weren't around people that talked about groupthink and black and white thinking and confirmation bias and some of these terms that were a lifeline for me to help me not spiritualize my last cult experience, but start to actually do the work and heal. And so that first season, we brought a lot of that to the podcast, and we've had so much feedback where people are like, okay, this is good, but we have to talk about it now because y'all just unearthed so much. I never thought about a lot of these principles. And that is where we started the support group for the past 2 years that meets every second and fourth Thursday of the month for the Black community. And we delve into a lot of topics like spiritual warfare in the Black community, the prophetic. We talk about the deliverance ministry, which I haven't even touched, and how dehumanizing that process is. Oh, you have a different sexual orientation, then you must have a demon. Come to the front of the church and we'll have several people lay hands on you until that demon is exorcised. So there's a lot that we have experienced within our own community, religious community. And so season 2 now, we've gone from just audio to audio and video as well. And we have a host of guests on, which is different from season 1. So if you go to the YouTube page, hopefully some of you will want to subscribe, because there are a lot of people that say, look, I'm not Black, but I want to know more. I want to understand how things have landed for you, how things are wired. How can I be an ally? So go check out the podcast, the YouTube channel, and subscribe if you so do choose to do so. And then as far as my personal work, yes, I support clients who have endured narcissistic abuse, religious trauma, spiritual abuse, and cult involvement. I am still presently taking clients. So you can find out more information on my website at NikkiGspeaks.com. And you can use my email if you'd like to reach out to me at NikkiGspeaks@yahoo.com. And send me nice messages, please. I remember one podcast I went on, I got an email and it was like almost 5 pages long. And I'm like, I don't even remember saying any of that stuff. But no, it's okay. If you have some issues, it's okay. We can talk. But yeah, so that's currently, the work I'm doing with that. Like I said, I'm also on the board of Tears of Eden, and that's been in existence for about 5 years. I ran and facilitated support groups there. My favorite thing is support groups. I love to meet people right where they are in what it seems like chaos and madness. And I like to just, I often say, for people that come out of this, there are the activists and they're on the outside of the church. And some people are still trying to knock on the door and scream and say, the church has to be the church. I said, how do you know they're not being the church? They are being the church. It's up to us to accept this is what it is. And now how should you live? How are you going to move forward knowing, so I don't try to change the system. I feel like my work is going into what I call the metaphorical infirmary, where people have been discarded, who have been through these type of experiences we talked about today. Society says, oh, we don't know what to do with you. The mental health community said, we don't know what to do with you. Your friends have left. You don't know who you are anymore. And you're really beat up. I like to go and sit with those type of people. And we don't even have to say anything at first. Let's just sit, let's just be, and to know that you're not alone. A lot of my journey, I did walk by myself. And I don't know if that was purposeful for me to be able to support people now, but I get it. Like I said, this year makes 10 years for me. But even as I tell these stories, I still remember. I remember the feeling. My body remembers the feeling. And so I don't try to act like I know everything with survivors. I like to meet them right where they are and encourage them and let them know, they can turn the page. They can turn the page and they can get that pen, like I was talking about, and write the rest of the chapters of their life. It does not have to be surrendered to the cult leader, to the cults, to the abuse in the family system. You can take your life back. Dr. Yanya Lalich, she wrote that book, Taking Your Life Back. You can take your life back. It's going to take some time. I tell people, throw your watch off. Don't let people pressure you. Okay, it's been 2 years now. Can we move along with this thing? Take as long as you need, but just know there are resources and support out there for you. So hopefully I answered everything.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. Great stuff. I think since we've gone well over 2 hours now, I'm gonna just say I'm sorry to everyone with the comments. I'm not gonna read them all at this point. There's just so many that I'm sure awesome comments, but you can certainly all read them on the side. But I appreciate you all so much being part of the community. And Nikki, this has been great. I heard a couple times there's a lot more to your story here, and so I do want to do a follow-up. And also, I'd like to bring you in at some point for a couple of roundtables I'm thinking about over the next year. But this has been a great way to kick it off. So much that I feel like I've learned, as well as a lot of questions that have arisen that I'd love to dig in deeper with you. But I just want to say I appreciate your willingness to share this, and also, honestly, just your willingness to admit that you got just like I did, we all got suckered by this stuff. And none of us are immune, and to go on and say, like, this stuff got me, it really got me. And to admit that, there's a humility it takes to admit it. And also, like, just your story becomes part of someone else's survival manual, as they say, and you end up, someone can relate to that fact and say, yeah, I think I'm in one too. But there is just so much pain that I think your story exemplifies. And so I'm sure you're only telling us, a very small sliver of some of this, the hardest parts of it, the dark night of the soul that you had to go through by yourself, especially with being a single mom at the beginning there. It's just, there's some really hard parts of your story. And I just appreciate that you're willing to take all this pain and to say, effectively, you're going to make something good out of it. I remember, that story, was it, Joseph and his brothers, where at the end of Genesis, he he finally reveals himself to his brothers, and he says, you meant this for evil, but God meant it for good, to save a lot of people from this famine. And in a sort of borrowing that concept, like, you're taking so much bad and you're turning it into something good, not because of God or for God, but because you were claiming your life, and you're also willing to help the community, because there's other people that are going through this and struggling to find a way out. So I appreciate so much your willingness to be a part of this.
And I appreciate you, Tim, and the community you've built. Like, a lot of these comments that I'm seeing and that you've been, reading off, like, your journeys are precious, just the same. And the work that you're doing individually is going to help your children. And your children's children, you know, you think about it. I have conversations with my daughter. I'm like, you know, when you have kids, it's like, look, no religion. I'm going to let them be. That is, quote unquote, what I think breaking generational curses. I heard that, you know, language used so much, and they did all these demonstrative things to break generational curses. But when you start coming out of the spell, is what I call it, and you start thinking for yourself and loving yourself and being able to help others, you know, like there's going to be a point of all this. And so now I make jokes. You know, I say I have 4 or 5 flavors of lemonade. You want peach lemonade? You want raspberry lemonade? I've been in, you know, the end time cult, the political stuff of the black church. Like, you know, there has to, you know, I'm going to say it has to, but I wanted to make purpose out of the pain that I experienced, because that's just how I am at the end of the day. And so thank you all in the comments and in the community for being so involved. I've enjoyed hearing from you just as much.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, to borrow from our triggers, I feel very blessed and highly favored to have spoken with you today. So thank you so much, everyone. Please again go like and subscribe to Nikki's YouTube channel and all the other stuff. But Nikki, so good to hear your story. So good to meet you. We'll definitely do it again sometime. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you to the community. Appreciate you all too as well. We'll be and don't forget, please, if you're a poet or you want to be don't forget to let me know about doing a poem of some kind, or at least watch it tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern in this poetry deconversion poetry slam. We'd love to have you, and we'll be doing them again. So if tomorrow night's not the right time, we'll do it again in a few months, and we'll have you then. But definitely a lot of ways in which poetry helps us to heal. So please do jump in when you can. But thanks again, Nikki. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.